Hello all out there in YouTube, and welcome back to another episode of Horror Talk, where I talk about horror movies, sometimes in a set location. For those of you who have been watching the past few videos in these past few weeks, you'll know that I have a very busy next couple of months going on. I have a lot of dogs that I'm going to be pet sitting for, so I'm not going to be in my regular location for a while. I will try to get back to my regular location as soon as possible, but until then, we're going to be in various other locations because I got a lot of dogs to take care of. This week I am taking care of Jimmy and Lexi, two very good Wheaton Terriers. Here they are. They're good doggies. But I'm at their house right now, and I apologize if the lighting is off and if the audio is off. This is the best location to film, and we at least got a interesting picture in the background here. But anyway, it's been a while since I've done an episode of Horror Talk, and I wanted to do one, so I figured, why not do one while I'm at this current location? So, for those of you new to my channel, Horror Talk is the series that I like to do, where it's a very relaxed series. I don't really take notes for it. I don't really plan it out. I just talk off the top of my head about a specific topic of horror. And as you can see by the title of this video, today we're going to talk about why I like trashy movies. And let me clarify that. Those who have been on my channel for a while know that I love supporting independent cinema. I love supporting low-budget movies, and I love supporting micro-budget movies. Now, I do enjoy a lot of stuff that's not part of the mainstream, but I don't like to trash mainstream movies. There's a lot of good stuff in mainstream cinema. There's also a lot of bad stuff in mainstream cinema. But the reason I prefer to look at like independent movies and lesser known movies and lower budget to micro budget movies is because there are already a lot of people out there who talk about the big budget stuff. You know, like when a movie comes out that is quite popular and loved by so many people, you already have a lot of people talking about those kinds of movies. Like, for example, John Wick Chapter 4. I love the John Wick series, and when John Wick Chapter 4 came out, I had a very good time with that one. And a lot of other people had a good time with that movie. And I personally have a hard time talking about movies that everybody else is already talking about. It's a thing in my brain that I have. It's one of the reasons why I suck at social media, and I have such a hard time commenting on other people's videos, replying to comments on my own videos. I don't like to say something about a movie unless I can add something new to the conversation. And with a movie like John Wick Chapter 4, a movie that everybody liked, I have a hard time making a movie about that because, making a video about that because in my mind, I would just be repeating what everyone else says. It's like, hey, you know this movie that everyone says is good? Yeah, it is. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's the same way with me and horror movies that so many people have talked about already, like The Shining or The Exorcist. I have a hard time, as much as I would love to do videos about those movies, I have a hard time doing it because I don't think there's anything new I can add to the conversation. But when it comes to lower budget movies, independent movies, micro budget movies, there are people on YouTube who talk about those things, and unfortunately they don't get nearly the amount of attention that they deserve. You know, there's people like Mr. Parka and Moods616 and other people in their circle that talk about more independent movies and micro budget movies and stuff like that. And those two channels are great, and they don't nearly get enough views. They deserve so many more views than they have. So yeah, I mean, if you have not watched any of Mr. Parker's videos or Mood616's videos or anybody who runs in their circle, if you haven't watched any of their videos, I suggest checking them out. So yes, I'm not going to pretend that I'm the only person who talks about movies like this. There are a lot of people on YouTube who talk about movies like this. But yeah, it's just, these are the kind of movies I like to talk about. As much as I enjoy talking about classy, more high-budget horror movies, I also like talking about the lower-budget horror movies, the sleazier, dirtier horror movies, the micro-budget horror movies, things like that. And getting back onto the topic at hand, I love supporting low-budget movies and micro-budget movies. I love supporting more sleazier movies and, like I said, movies that have little to no budget. I love doing that. Now, not every movie out there that has little to no budget is a horror movie, but a lot of movies that have little to no budget have been accepted by the horror genre, because what other genre would have them? So yes, even though this is an episode of Horror Talk, I'm going to be talking about some low to micro budget movies that aren't necessarily horror movies, but they do, I think, still fit in this category. When it comes to movies that have little to no budget, or movies that have a slightly bigger budget but focus on the sleazier side of things, the dirtier sides of things, things like Troma movies, things like John Waters movies, movies like Thriller, A Cruel Picture, or The Sinful Dwarf, things like that. A lot of these movies are considered by many people to be trash, especially the movies that have little to no money. Something like Video Violence, which is a shot-on-video movie, a lot of people would consider a movie like that trash because of its low budget, because of the fact that the quality isn't as good as something that has more money behind it. Yes, the effects are a little on the rougher side, the acting is a little on the rougher side, the music is a little on the rougher side, because the people who made those movies did not have a lot of money to work with, so they had to work with what they had. Or if you look at Troma movies like The Toxic Avenger or Poultrygeist, those movies have a little more money behind them. They're not necessarily micro-budget movies, but they are low-budget movies. But they tend to look at things in a dirtier way. They tend to be grittier, they tend to be raunchier, they tend to have a lot of bad taste humor. A lot of movies like that are considered trash by many people. And I tend to enjoy trash. I created a series on my channel called Trash Reviews, which is a series where I look at some of these lower budget gritty movies or these micro budget movies that are considered trash by so many people, and I look at them in an endearing way. I look at them in a positive way, and I try to, talk about these movies as movies, and I show an appreciation for what many people consider to be trash. That's why in that series I have the gimmick that I do. For those who have not seen that series, in every series, I end up stuck upside down in a trash can, and I review the movie while I'm stuck upside down in a trash can, and the idea of it is, I'm in the trash, so I might as well talk about some trashy movies. These movies are considered trash, so I'm kind of joining these movies in trash as I'm showing them an appreciation. It's an odd gimmick, I know, but I have a weird sense of humor, and I like to embrace my weirdness. But I want to talk about why I appreciate movies like this. Movies that either have little to no money, or movies that have a small budget but tend to be on the grittier, darker, dirtier side of things, like Troma films and stuff like that. Now, when it comes to these kinds of movies, I will be the first one to admit that there is a lot of shit when it comes to low to no budget filmmaking. I'll be the first one to admit that. But there's also a lot of shit in big budget studio films, so that's why I don't see that as a real valid argument. You can find crap anywhere. You can find treasure anywhere, and you can find crap anywhere. It doesn't matter how much money is put behind it, or how little money the thing has. I admire people who try to make something out of nothing. When people have very little money, but they still want to make a movie, and they do everything they can to make the best movie possible with what little they have. I admire that so much. My biggest complaint when it comes to movies, the two things that bug me the most, are when the movie fills its runtime with padding because the filmmakers aren't able to put interesting stuff throughout their film, but they still want to drag it out to a feature length, or when they don't take advantage of their idea. There are so many movies, whether they have a big budget or no budget, that don't take advantage of their ideas, and that drives me nuts. You have the opportunity to make a movie. You have the opportunity to show people what you can do. And you have an idea, whether it be a silly idea, a complex idea, a weird idea, or something that's very simple. You have the opportunity to show people what you can do, and when a filmmaker decides to do nothing with their idea, that bothers me, and I personally find that insulting, because I see so many people who want to make films and they think they can't because they don't have any money, but they should, because if you put effort into it, you can make something good. And I've seen so many filmmakers make movies with little to no money, filmmakers that would kill for a decent budget, but they're working with, in a way, table scraps, and they're still putting so much effort into these movies. They're doing everything they can to make these micro-budget films the best movies they can. And I see some of these micro-budget films and these lower-budget films, and I see so much effort put into them. You know, so much effort put into them with very little money. And then I see these other filmmakers who have an idea and do nothing with it. That, to me, that bothers me. I have so much more respect for people who make something out of nothing than people who make nothing out of something. It's why I tend to be harder on bigger budget movies, because in my mind, big budget studio films, and there are plenty of big budget studio films I love, don't get me wrong, but there are a lot of big budget studio films that are bad. We can't deny this. There are a lot of bad ones out there, whether it's because of studio interference, whether it's because the filmmakers just kind of fucked up. There are a lot of bad, big-budget studio films out there. And for me, there's no excuse for that, because these movies have the money, they have the resources, they have so much at their disposal to make a good movie, whereas these lower-budget and these micro-budget films don't have the same resources, but they're doing everything they can to make them good. Yes, the effects don't look as good as something in a big-budget studio, but of course they're not going to. They're working with so little. And I'm not saying that filmmaking is easy. Whether you have a shit ton of money or no money, filmmaking is hard. Filmmaking is always going to be difficult. But the more money you have, the more resources you have at your disposal, the better. And like I said, when you have all those resources at your disposal, there's no excuse for making a bad movie. Whereas a lot of micro-budget films and lower-budget films, they don't have those same resources, but they're making the best movies they possibly can. And yeah, they're rough around the edges, but there's still so much effort put into them, and these movies are so good, especially for their budget. I hope I'm making sense here. I really hope. Please let me know if I'm making sense. Focusing on lower budget movies for now, and I'm talking about movies that have less than $1 million. I mean, anybody who wants to make movies and has no money would kill for $1 million. Anybody who has no money and wants to make movies would kill for $1,000 to make their film. There are a lot of movies out there that have, like, money that's in the hundreds of thousands range, but they still do so much with that little amount of money that I admire. These are not the micro-budget films, but they are still low-budget, you know, movies. One of the most well-known low-budget films ever made is, of course, Halloween. And I love Halloween. For the longest time, Halloween was my favorite horror movie of all time. It has dropped. Forgive all the noises and my distractions. There's two terriers running around this room every now and again, so if you hear something in the background or you see me wander off, I apologize. But anyway, you know, Halloween had a budget of like $300,000, give or take. And it became one of the most successful independent films out there. And then, of course, you have Friday the 13th, which I think the budget for that was $550,000. So you have Halloween and Friday the 13th, two low-budget films that made so much money and are so well known amongst horror fans. But then you look at Troma Films. Troma as many of us Troma fans know, it's an independent production company started by Lloyd Kaufman, and they produce independent low-budget movies. They've made their own, and they've distributed others. But Troma Films is most well known for The Toxic Avenger, which is the movie that put Troma on the map. It's their most well-known movie, and I love The Toxic Avenger. I'll go out of my way to say it's my favorite superhero movie, and I would put it in my top 30 favorite films of all time. But you look at The Toxic Avenger, that was a movie made for about $475,000, which is a lot of money. So yet, $475,000, that's a lot of money. But you look at The Toxic Avenger and what that movie did, comparing it to Halloween and Friday the 13th, and again, I love Halloween and Friday the 13th. I will never say that The Toxic Avenger is a better movie than Friday the 13th and Halloween, but I'm also not going to say that Friday the 13th and Halloween are better movies than The Toxic Avenger. They're good for their own reasons. But just looking at budget and what each film does with its budget, the filmmakers in each movie does with their budget. Now, I'll admit, yes, The Toxic Avenger has a bigger budget than Halloween, which had a budget of $300,000. But Friday the 13th had a bigger budget than both of those movies, around $550,000. And you have Toxic Avenger in the middle with $475,000. Give or take, I've heard a few different things, but it's in that range. Halloween and Friday the 13th are slasher movies, and I love slasher movies, but the premise is simple for both of them. It's a guy going around killing people. In Friday the 13th, there was more gore, and, you know, you had Tom Savini, one of the first movies he worked on. Not the first movie he worked on, but one of his earliest films. He did the effects work for that movie, and it all looks great. And, of course, you know the money went for locations and everything like that. But the premise is very simple. It's a slasher movie. It's someone going around killing people in a set location. $550,000. And I know that every penny went towards this film, and every penny went towards making the best movie they could. But you look at The Toxic Avenger, it's a superhero movie made for $475,000. There's fight sequences in this movie. I mean, they're rough around the edges, but they still have fight sequences. The gore effects in The Toxic Avenger are a little more involved than a lot of the gore effects in Friday the 13th. Now, Friday the 13th, you did have a head decapitation, and you had an arrow going through someone's neck, and axes going in faces. Very good effects work. But in The Toxic Avenger, you had someone's face getting crushed with a piece of exercise equipment. You had a kid get their head run over. You had Toxie ripping someone's arm off and then hitting them with it. These very extravagant death sequences. And not only that, like I said, you have fight scenes, and you have a tank in this movie, a real army tank in the film. And you have car stunts in this movie. Like, there's a scene where Toxie is riding on top of a car as it's driving down the road, and there are some scenes where it's shot farther back and you can tell the car's not really moving as things are happening, but there are scenes where a car is driving and Toxie's hanging onto the roof, where Toxie is climbing into the car. There's a car flipping here, there's some crashes, some very well done car stunts in this movie for a much smaller budget. And of course, I have the utmost respect for Halloween and Friday the 13th. I want to make it clear to any fans of those movies, I am not knocking those movies at all. I'm just talking about how innovative The Toxic Avenger is. With a budget that's between Halloween and Friday the 13th, it does so much more than both those movies. And again, Halloween had a smaller budget than Friday the 13th and Toxic Avenger, but Friday the 13th had a bigger budget than The Toxic Avenger, and The Toxic Avenger did so much. It did a lot more with its budget than Friday the 13th did with its budget. But again, not knocking Friday the 13th. This is just showing the innovation of people who work with what they have. Troma Films and Lloyd Kaufman and company, they make some... It's not... The reason I respect them so much is not just because they make movies with smaller budgets and make them very entertaining, but they're not afraid to go to some pretty nasty places. Now, a lot of the Lloyd Kaufman Troma films are on the comedic side of things, but they're raunchy comedies, they're dirty comedies, and they're bad taste comedies. I have no problem with bad taste humor. There is a difference, though, between good bad taste and bad taste. And people like Lloyd Kaufman and John Waters, people like that, they understand the difference between good bad taste and bad taste. You know, good bad taste is when you're making fun of everybody. Bad taste is when you're just going after a single group and you're not really... You don't really care about the entertainment factor, you care more about the fact that it's offensive than the fact that it's entertaining. People like Lloyd Kaufman and Troma Films, they're not afraid to make their movies dirtier. What inspired me to talk about trashy movies and do this video was watching Tromeo and Juliet. Tromeo and Juliet is one of my favorite Troma films. It's either in my top 2 or top 3. You know, like, my top 3 are Toxic Avenger, Terra Firma, and Tromeo and Juliet. Tromeo and Juliet and Terra Firma, I go back and forth between those two. But anyway, in Tromeo and Juliet, one of the first things you see is a nipple piercing. You see a woman getting her nipple pierced, and it's hard to watch, especially for me. I got a thing with nipple torture. I have no problem with nipple piercings, I just can't see them happen. I mean, like, nipple torture and torturing nipples, that's my thing. That's the thing that makes me go, eh. Everybody has one of those things that make them squirm, and nipple torture is that for me. But I appreciated the fact that they showed it on camera. They didn't cut away. It was right there out front in the open. And it's not only that, there was a lesbian sex scene in the movie. There's a lot of, like, dirty things in this movie. There's a lot of nudity in the film. There's a lot of, like, but it's a love story. Tromeo and Juliet, obviously it's a play on Romeo and Juliet, but this is a much raunchier punk rock version of Romeo and Juliet. That's why I love Troma films and these more underground independent films that are a little grittier and dirtier, because these filmmakers aren't afraid to go to these places. They're not afraid to have nudity. They're not afraid to have lesbian sex, gay sex, all these other things in there. They're not afraid to embrace these things that people don't really like to talk about, like seeing someone get a nipple piercing and things like that. They're not afraid to acknowledge the scuzzy facts of life. You know, I mean, like, especially like Toxic Avenger, Terra Firma, Tromeo and Juliet, there's a lot of sex in these movies, and these sex scenes, some of them are done in a sexy way, but most of them are done just like in a, you know, that dirty, raunchy way, and I appreciate when films do this. I appreciate the fact that they're not afraid to show really dirty, raunchy sex, and I appreciate the fact that they're not ashamed to show anybody naked. You know, like in Troma films and John Waters movies and stuff like that, anybody can be naked in those films. It's not just the typical Hollywood pretty people who are, you know, throwing their tits out and stuff like that. It's normal everyday people getting naked on camera, and I appreciate that. I'm a big supporter of body positivity, and I'm a big supporter of sex positivity, and I appreciate when movies show the dirtier side of life, show the raunchier side of life, because life is raunchy, life is dirty. I mean, I say this very openly. I think there would be a lot less friction between men and women if a lot of men would just accept the fact that women shit. But that's the whole thing. He's like, yes, so many of the things we love in life are dirty, are raunchy. I take care of dogs for a living, and everybody talks about how great the job is, and it's a great job. I love the job, but I pick up shit after dogs. I take them out to take a piss, pick up their crap. That's my job, but and I get to play with dogs and stuff. It's a great job, and I love it, but it is a dirty job. Childbirth is considered one of the most beautiful things out there, and it is. Childbirth is a beautiful thing, but you think about it, babies are shot out of a woman's vagina covered in blood and various other fluids. It's a very dirty deed, and it's a painful deed, but it is one of the most beautiful things out there, but there is filth involved in it. Hell, we all love sex. Sex is great. Sex is so much fun. It's filthy, it's dirty, and it should be. That's part of what makes it fun. And that's why I appreciate these movies that aren't afraid to show the dirtier, raunchier side of life, because there's a sincerity there. I appreciate movies acknowledging the dirty facts of life, and I think more people need to acknowledge the dirty facts of life. That's why I love these movies. Again, I hope I am making sense. I apologize if I'm not, but I hope you understand where I'm coming from with that. And now moving on to the micro-budget films. Micro-budget films are movies that have a budget of around $30,000, give or take. You know, it might be a little over $30,000, it might be under $30,000, it might be very under $30,000. But that's a micro-budget film, at least in my mind. I'm sure other people have that same definition, and I'm sure other people have a different definition for it. But for me, micro-budget filmmaking, around $30,000, that's the budget. I mean, and I will give, like $50,000. Yeah, I can consider that a bit of a micro-budget too, but depending on what they're doing with that $50,000. Once you start going over $50,000, in my mind, you're going into low-budget territory. But once you get under $50,000, that's when you're going into micro-budget territory. Nothing wrong with going either way. That's just how I see it in my mind. Now, again, I fully admit there is a lot of crap in the micro-budget category. There's a lot of it. But there's a lot of good stuff in the micro-budget category as well. And I love to show appreciation to micro-budget movies that do so much with so little, and try to do everything they can with what little they have. There are a lot of micro-budget movies that are real movies. They just, you know, they don't get the same respect as real movies because they have no budget. So they don't have highly trained actors. They have amateur actors. They have amateur filmmakers. They have amateur effects artists. But a lot of these amateurs are making real movies with so little, and those are the kinds of movies that I love to praise. For me, and this is just my opinion, the movies that I consider to be the gold standard of micro-budget filmmaking are Pink Flamingos, Basket Case, Father's Day by Astron 6, Shatter Dead, and At Dawn They Sleep. And I saw At Dawn They Sleep very recently. That was my most recent trash review. To let you know what I'm talking about with micro-budget movies and effort put into them, we're going to look at Dawn They Sleep first. I did a trash review for At Dawn They Sleep. I recommend checking that one out because At Dawn They Sleep is an amazing movie done with so little money, like such a small budget. At Dawn They Sleep was directed by Brian Paulin. This is a guy who's big in underground horror cinema. And he done movies like Fetus, and his films are known for being, you know, very dark, you know, not afraid to go to more extreme levels. A lot of respect for the guy because he's one of those people that does so much with so little. And At Dawn They Sleep was one of his earliest films. It's an action vampire movie. Now, I did this in the trash review, but I want to do it again here just to emphasize how, you know, amazing it is that people are able to do this with so little money. I like to compare At Dawn They Sleep to movies like The Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity. Now, I have a lot of respect for The Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity. They are, you know, they weren't the first found footage movies, but they were the movies that caused the found footage boom. And these two films are Blair Witch Project. It's over $50,000, so I put it more in the low budget category, but it had only a budget of $60,000, and Paranormal Activity only had a budget of $15,000, so that micro budget there. But anyway, these are two movies that had so little money, made their films, and went on to be huge successes. I mean, yeah, it's like Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity have become iconic in the horror genre. Now, you had Blair Witch Project, which had a budget of $60,000, and Paranormal Activity that had a budget of $15,000. And I compare them to At Dawn They Sleep, which is a vampire action movie that only had a budget of $7,000. Now, again, the utmost respect for Paranormal Activity and Blair Witch Project, but look at what those two movies did. Blair Witch Project, $60,000. It's people wandering around the woods. You don't see a lot happening, and that's what makes it scary. What you don't see is scarier than what you do see, and it's the suggested horrors that make that movie so effective. But again, $60,000, it's mostly people wandering around the woods. Paranormal Activity, $15,000, and there is some impressive effects work in that film to make it look like the place is haunted and that there's paranormal activity going on throughout the movie. But the film is two people in their house waiting for something scary to happen. You know, people wandering around the room, people wandering around the woods, $60,000. People basically sitting in their house, $15,000. And there's more that happens in the film, but that's essentially what these two movies are about. And then you look at Dawn They Sleep, a vampire action movie made for $7,000. This movie has shootouts. It has John Woo-style shootouts where people are, you know, shooting guns at each other and flying through the air, and there's explosions and stuff, and there's this stunt work throughout. And yeah, it's rough around the edges because they had no money, but they're still putting in John Woo-style action shootouts in their film. And the thing that blows my mind the most is that At Dawn They Sleep has car stunts in their film. You know, you have a scene where one car hits another. You have a scene where a car flips over. You have a scene where a car drives through a building. I go into more detail about this in the review, so if you want more detail about this, watch that. But my point is, Blair Witch Project, $60,000. People wandering around the woods. Paranormal Activity, $15,000. People sitting around in their house waiting for a ghost to attack them. At Dawn They Sleep, $7,000. Shootouts and car stunts. And there's also great gore effects in that film, and there's a very interesting, unique story. Again, watch the review if you want more detail about that, but that is so admirable. There's terriers playing over there, so I apologize for the background noise, but that is amazing. People taking $7,000 and trying to make an action movie, and in many ways succeeding. Yes, it's very rough around the edges because they only had $7,000, but they still made an action movie with $7,000. They had car stunts with only $7,000, and that is incredible to me. Hell, stepping away from At Dawn They Sleep and looking at Father's Day by Astron 6. Now, this is a movie that's very, very extreme in some points. There is a lot of bad taste humor in the film, and there's a lot of disturbing moments in the movie. It's a horror comedy with some disturbing moments. So there's moments where you're just going, oh God, and then there's moments when you're laughing, and it's a legitimately funny movie. It's a legitimately funny movie, and it's a legitimate disturbing movie. Father's Day is about this guy who is trying to hunt down the serial killer who is going around raping and murdering fathers. I'm going to say this here. I might have said this in another video, but I want to say this here. I appreciate the film looking at that side of things, because when it comes to rape in movies, it's usually something that's shown that happens to women. And this is a movie that shows it happening to men, and I appreciate a movie showing the other side of it. I'm not pretending that Father's Day is doing it to be deep. They are doing it for shock value, but it is still a movie that's showing the other side of it, you know, and I appreciate that a movie does show the other side of it. But anyway, so this is a movie made for $10,000, and it looks amazing. I won't say it looks like a full-blown movie that you would see in multiple movie theaters, but it looks like a legitimately good, like a very well-made movie done with only $10,000. And this is a spoiler alert, but towards the end of the film, there's a scene where the characters go to hell, and they make their own version of hell with only $10,000. Father's Day is such a good movie, and again, only made with $10,000. That's one of the reasons why I want people to see these movies and show appreciation for these films. The people at Astron 6 are getting more recognition, and they're getting more money to make other films and make bigger films with better budgets, but you look at people like Brian Paulin and the boys at Astron 6 taking so little money and making good movies out of it. These are the people I want to see get a decent budget. I'm not going to say multi-millions of dollars hundreds of millions of dollars, but like decent mid-budgets, and you know that you would get good quality movies. You know that they would put every penny into making the best movie they could. Shatter Dead. Last year I started my journey into shot-on-video horror movies, and At Dawn They Sleep and Shatter Dead have become my two favorites, and I am so happy that I've been diving into these because I found some good stuff. I found some bad stuff, but I found some really good stuff. And Shatter Dead is amazing. This is another one I did a trash review for, and I recommend checking out that video. But what I love about this is it's the most original zombie film I've ever seen. And that's all I'm going to say about it. Watch the review if you want to hear more details, but if you're looking for an original zombie movie, if you're someone like me who has gotten tired of the lack of originality in the zombie genre recently, Shatter Dead is one of the most original zombie movies ever made. And it's a very dark movie, and it's creates a bit of an existential crisis when you watch it, but it's so well done. And that movie had a budget of like $30,000. And yes, the effects is rough around the edges, the acting's rough around the edges, but everybody's putting in so much effort, and you get a legitimately good, interesting, highly original film. Like Basket Case, you look at Frank Henenlotter with Basket Case. It's become a cult classic, and that was a movie that started off with no money. Frank Henenlotter had $8,000, and a friend of his who wanted to produce a film had $8,000, so they started with $16,000. And they raised money while making the movie, eventually getting to around $35,000. But they had to raise that money while making the film, and so many people have said this, but there are scenes where you see cash in the film, and that was the cash they had for the movie. And of course, my favorite director of all, John Waters. Pink Flamingos, one of the filthiest films ever made. John Waters is my favorite director, and Pink Flamingos is my favorite movie by him. Pink Flamingos would be in my top 30 favorite films of all time. A lot of these low to no budget films aren't really in my top 30 favorite films, but some of them are. I have a weird list. I have movies like Pink Flamingos and Toxic Avenger in my top 30, and I have all-time classics like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Rocky, and Smokey and the Bandit in that list, too. I have weird tastes, and I admit that, and I take pride in that. But Pink Flamingos and many of John Waters' earlier movies, this was a guy who had no money, and he had this group of friends, this little group of misfits that didn't have anything to their name, but they made movies anyway, and they gained notoriety by making movies. Pink Flamingos is one of the raunchiest, most dirtiest... There's a lot that happens in Pink Flamingos, but it gained John Waters notoriety, and he built a career out of that. John Waters is now on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and he started with movies like Multiple Maniacs and Pink Flamingos. Pink Flamingos was part of that underground film movement, that midnight film movement, and Pink Flamingos is the catalyst for so many other films being made today. I mean, you could probably say that Jackass wouldn't exist without Pink Flamingos. Yeah, but Pink Flamingos was all about pushing limits. It was an experiment in bad taste, and it does so much in there that you would not see in so many mainstream films. I mean, this movie has drag queens, it has homosexuals, it has transsexuals. There's a scene where there's a transsexual in this film who was just a friend of John Waters, who was transitioning at the time, and he captured this moment in film. And it pushes so many limits and bothered so many people, and it's good because of that. But it pushed so many limits, and it's all the better for it. It's not a movie for everyone. Not everyone's gonna like the movie, but I do think everyone should see Pink Flamingos at least once, and be ready to be nauseous afterwards. And that's the thing. Filmmakers like those who work with Troma, people like John Waters, filmmakers like Frank Henenlotter, filmmakers like Brian Pollin, these are people that aren't afraid to make movies that push limits. They're not afraid to make movies that step away from the norm, that step out of so many people's comfort zones. And those are the real rebels in filmmaking. You have people talking about how they want representation in film now. John Waters had drag queens and trans people and homosexuals in movies, and he put them in his movies because it bothered so many other people. So he deliberately tried to bother people with this stuff. There's two sayings here, one that's important for film and one that I think is important for film and all of life. Let's talk about the one in film first, and this came from Frimer from Troma Films. There's a moment in that film where a character says, sometimes pissing people off is the only way to get them to look at shit. And that's true in many ways. A lot of times if you want people to pay attention to something, you have to punch them in their comfort zone. And a lot of the filmmakers I'm talking about today did that. And there's another quote, I heard it from John Waters, but I don't think he's the one who came up with this quote, but it is important, and I think it's important in film and all of life. If you try to please everybody, you end up pleasing nobody. And I think that is such an important thing for everyone to learn, not just with filmmaking, not just with art, but in life in general. If you live your life trying to please everybody, you're going to end up pleasing nobody. I am a recovering people pleaser. I used to care so much about pleasing everybody, and I wouldn't please anyone in the process. And I kept on feeling bad about myself, and the only person I wasn't trying to please was myself, and I wasn't happy. I still like trying to make other people happy, and I still try to be a good person, but I focus on myself now as well, which was something I really needed to learn, and these films helped me learn that. I've seen so many films that try to please everyone, and they just fall flat. But you look at these films, you look at movies by John Waters, Frank Henenlotter, Brian Paulen, Troma, and all these other films. They are not trying to please everybody. And they have such a huge cult following. Again, Troma is so well known. So many people got their start in Troma. There are so many classic filmmakers out there. Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, Francis Ford Coppola. There are so many classic films out there, and there are great filmmakers in big budget studio films. But I think it's also important to celebrate the outcasts in many ways, the misfits, the underground filmmakers, people like John Waters, Lloyd Kaufman, Frank Henenlotter, Brian Paulen. I hear John Waters is going to be making a new film soon, or he's trying to make a new film soon, and I hope he is able to make it. I can't wait to see it. I think Lloyd Kaufman is trying to get another movie off the ground, and I love to see it. I hope it comes out. And I know Troma is producing more stuff and distributing more independent films, and I am so grateful for that. I would love to see the boys at Astron 6 do something else. These, as important as these classic, well-known, popular filmmakers are, as important as people like Denis Villeneuve are, I think these underground filmmakers, these low to micro-budget filmmakers are just as important as the big guys. Because, again, they're not trying to please everybody. They're the ones who aren't afraid to be raunchy. They're not afraid to go in this more rebellious punk rock attitude. They're not afraid to make weird, wacky, dirty films. And I think it's important to have these kinds of films, something that steps away from the norm. We need more filmmakers like this. I want to see, I know I'm in the minority here, but I would love to see more John Waterses of the world. I would love to see the next Lloyd Kaufman. I would love to see the next Frank Henenlotter. I would love to see the next Brian Paulen. We need filmmakers like this that aren't afraid to step away from the norm, to embrace the dirty stuff, to embrace the weirdness. Because that's the proper way to rebel nowadays. I mean, we need a little more rebellion in film. People who aren't afraid to actually push the limits. People who aren't afraid to not please everybody. We need that rebellion in film nowadays. I mean, hell, OnlyFans models are rebelling more than filmmakers nowadays, and that... we need that rebellion in film. We need that rebellion in art more. We need filmmakers that say, hey, it's okay to embrace your weird side. It's okay to embrace the strange. It's okay to to embrace the punk elements of your life. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I do trash reviews, and that's one of the reasons that I do trash reviews the way I do trash reviews. Yeah, it's weird. I'm doing the review while upside down in a trash can. Not the whole time, but it's like, but you know what? It's odd and it's weird, and I love to embrace the weird side of things and tell people, hey, it's okay to be weird. I mean, hell, yeah, dive into a trash can every now and again. Actually, no, don't do that. I'm just kidding. But if there's a weird side of you that you want to embrace and you want to share with other people, do it. As long as you're not hurting anybody, do it. If you have a weird idea for a film, make it, whether you have a lot of money or no money. I have so much love for these outsider filmmakers, and I would love to see more outsider filmmakers get that kind of love, get that kind of attention. So, yeah, that is my video on micro-budget films, lower-budget films, and trashy films. I love showing appreciation for these kinds of films because I think it's important to, you know, have appreciation for these kinds of movies, because stuff like this and filmmakers like this are what lead to more originality in film, and more chances in film, and more rebellion in art. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this extra rambly, tangent-filled video. Let me know some other horror talks you would like to see in the future. I will hopefully be getting back to some regular reviews soon. And on that note, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for the continued support on this channel. It does truly, truly mean a lot to me. Like I said, there are so many other channels you could be watching right now, but the fact that you took time out of your day to watch my stuff, it really does mean so much to me. But until then, I hope you all have a good day, week, or whatever. And until next time, this is the Maniac, here to remind you that the Grindhouse will never die.